Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Arnold Sampson flew medical helicopters in Vietnam. Unarmed, he would pilot the craft over and into the jungle to save wounded soldiers. Sometimes it meant hovering at 200 feet over the forest canopy while being shot at. This is a story about history and some thoughts on the experience of war. Arnold, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
I'd be happy to, Pat, but first allow me to thank you for having me as a part of this experience, as part of your podcast. My story is that a Baltimore born and raised guy, went to public schools in Baltimore, including college. And in college, at the time, the program of the college required able-bodied men to take part in ROTC for the first 2 years of college, get in uniforms and do drill and the whole thing. And then if you were promising, at least this is what they sold us on, they allowed us, they recruited for the advanced corps, but only for promising cadets. And I was deemed to be a promising cadet. So I did the advanced corps. At the end of 4 years, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. Most people may not realize it, but the Army has branches. We think of military branches as, the various arms, Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force, but the Army has 19 branches inside of it. I became a member of the Medical Service Corps, which is headquartered at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. The typical Army protocol, I believe, was that they would have newly reporting lieutenants go to their branch school to learn more about the branch they were in, and then to get their first assignment orders, and off they would go to their first assignment. Well, as part of that 2-month orientation, it was a 60-day orientation. Part of that 2-month orientation, I was shown, along with my class of about 23 brand new lieutenants and one actual captain. He had taken a while from his commission date to report to duty, so he was a captain by the time he came on active duty. We were shown I will call it a propaganda movie. It was hypnotic. It showed that the Medical Service Corps oversaw a mission called Dustoff. It was to rescue people on the battlefield and get them quick, fast, and in a hurry to medical facilities. It looked so dramatic and so heroic. And I just said, oh my God, I want that. Yes. And so at the end of the film, they said, who wants to volunteer for flight school? I speculate, because I didn't turn around, I was looking at my own hand. I speculate that about 12, 13 hands went up in my class. And again, it was a class of about 23, 24 guys. And of those 12 or 13 hands, 6 of us actually passed the physical medical requirement. We had to make sure we weren't too nearsighted or something, colorblind or something. 6 of us were picked to go to flight school, and I was one of the 6, obviously. And the first part of flight school is 4 months, and that's at Fort Walters, Texas, and Mineral Wells, Texas. We flew a helicopter that looked like a dragonfly, had a big old bubble and a long tail, and is an observation helicopter. And we trained in those for the first 4 months. And at the end of the 4 months, we were then given a choice of going to Fort Rucker, Alabama, or to Savannah, to the Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. I chose to go to Georgia, to Savannah Army Airfield. There, we began to fly and train in Hueys, which was the aircraft of choice for, at least for what the mission I was going to fly, but it was for many, many, many missions. It was the aircraft. It was the go-to aircraft for the Army in Vietnam. So 4 more months there. At the end of 8 months, I got a few days leave, maybe 3 weeks or a month, and then off to Vietnam. I reported to Vietnam and was assigned to the 68th Medical Detachment, HA, which I presume stands for Helicopter Ambulance. And it was at the time in Chu Lai. Pardon me. The time was in a place called Huey, but then not too long afterwards, the whole unit moved to a city called Chu Lai. I was the luckless guy, the lowest ranking commissioned officer. So I was the movement officer. Dreadful duty, but we moved the entire unit to this new place, and I began flying medevac missions. Our call sign was Dustoff. Hence, I wrote a book eventually when I reflected on the experience called Dustoff More Than Met the Eye. Dustoff was the aircraft that you see in films about Vietnam that had the red cross on the nose and on the doors. It was unique because it did not have machine guns. It had a two pilots. One was a pilot in control, whose title was the aircraft commander, and the other was the just called the pilot. Some units called him the Peter pilot. My unit didn't do that. We were just the pilot. So, and then we had a crew chief and a medic. They were the heart and soul of that aircraft, as far as I'm concerned, because when men were loaded on board, they were the ones helping to keep them alive with IVs and bandages and pressure bandages and talk, just to kind of keep them awake so that we could get them to a hospital alive. And we managed to do that every time. I feel blessed that no man died during my in the flights that I was responsible for or took part in. Um, I want to pause though, even though I'm telling you my story, Pat. As a matter of respect, I want to make sure I'm on track.
Oh, yeah. No, this is fascinating. In the course of a day or a week, how many missions did you fly?
Thank you for asking that question. I would guesstimate. That's an excellent question because I didn't think about it. Breaking it down to missions, I would say 15 to 20. It could have been as many as 30. Not all missions were dangerous. All missions were gratifying. All missions were hairy, which means HAIRY, which means a little bit scary because it could start out as a cool, calm mission. And when you get on the ground, somebody lurking in the bushes might take a shot or shots. So you never knew. There was no such thing as completely safe for the most part. And we would get wounded sometimes in very desperate conditions. Sometimes the units would still be engaging with the quote enemy, and in those instances, they would say, "Dustoff, bring gunships with you. Bring gunbirds with you." That would mean they would ask us to bring, in our case, Huey Cobras, two-man aircraft that had grenades and a minigun or two, and had rocket launchers on it. It was a floating artillery platform, weapons platform, and they would those gunships, which I only used a couple times. Or most of the time, I'll explain that in a minute. But most of the time, I would go in, take a chance, and say to the unit, "Look, I'm going to swoop in real fast, grab your man. If we start taking fire, you give us covering fire so we can get out of there. We'll come back and get your man as soon as it's safe." It was a crazy, reckless thing to do. Clearly not unique to me, but I found it more nerve-wracking to be in orbit waiting for gunships to come than I did taking a chance to fly in. I would just take the chance. It was crazy when I look back at it, because if we had taken fire, that fire could have disabled the aircraft, could have killed us all or somebody on the aircraft we were on, and it would have just been a real debacle. Thank goodness that did not happen. We did take fire, and there was plenty of, not all the time. I don't want to embellish anything, and this is not really about me. This is about the fact that Unbeknownst to the public, there were men who were dedicated to helping their fellow soldiers get to medical care that would save their lives. Those were the Dustoff unit. They were scattered all over the country. Mine happened to be the 68th Med Detachment. Some of the bravest men I knew, and they didn't even know how brave they were. But they'd get on that aircraft, and we would fly out to the pickup site and grab men. And I'd say men because women had not yet gone into combat roles for the military. So all the personnel that I evac'd were males, and so it's not me being chauvinistic saying men, men, men. It was gratifying, but also I saw things during those missions or on the ground after I got back to a heliport, to get back home, that were those visions were disturbing to me, and I knew that they were they were impacting me. And it's in my book, I talk about those things, and I do it in part to get some things off my chest, which was kind of selfish, but I wanted to just get that out of my head and get it out there into the air. But also, in retrospect, I realized that just maybe, other veterans might read the book and realize that it kind of liberated them, gave them permission to share some of the things that they were exposed to, because a lot of times veterans from Vietnam, which was not a happy war, I don't know if any wars are happy, came back home and they clammed right up. They didn't want to talk about it to their people, their families, their friends. And out of a matter of deference, their friends wouldn't ask them, thinking, we don't want to take you back to a dark moment. And sadly, in many instances, following our cool welcome, if you can call it that, cool reception back to the States, then that just added to it, because many times veterans interpreted that lack of questions or lack of curiosity as disinterest, and not caring and indifference. And that probably was not true. I think people were trying to protect the veteran, and we did not see it that way. About that cool reception, frankly, I was a lucky one, I think. When I returned to the States, I didn't have the good judgment to take off my uniform. And so when I returned to Washington State, I ended up flying home, getting a commercial flight back to Maryland. People looked at me strange. I don't remember anybody saying, "Welcome home, soldier." I don't remember that. I remember the Krishners, the Hare Krishners, in a couple airports that I was in. I think I had a layover, and they were doing what they do, and they looked at me, but they didn't say anything to me. But I think other veterans had a much more cruel welcome than I did. The only person I can remember being happy about my return was my mother. She only had one child, and I was the grown-up child that she had. She was the only one. The truth be known, some years later, many years later, there was Desert Storm, and when that campaign was over, the veterans from Desert Storm were welcomed and honored with a ticker tape parade on Wall Street, and they threw confetti at them, and I'm sure there was music, and I watched it on TV and surprised myself because I cried, because I realized then what we Vietnam veterans had not experienced, and it was just really sad. I mean, I wish I had not realized it. I wish I'd have been ignorant. Ignorance is bliss. But I realized then what we missed, and I continue to feel it, because in Maryland, I'm a Marylander, and it turns out that if I'm wearing my Vietnam veteran cap and run into another veteran who doesn't know me other than to see my cap, and he may have something on that says he was a Vietnam veteran, he'll say, "Welcome home, brother," and I'll say the same thing 50-some years later. I mean, that's how much we were touched by the lack of welcome at the time we got back. I mean, we thought we had done something. We thought we had sacrificed our time, gone into a furnace that no one was prepared to go into, faced hazards. And believe me, I'm not pretending for a moment this was unique to me, not by a stretch. As far as I'm concerned, every Vietnam veteran was a warrior. And some of those warriors did heroic things, and they were heroes, some of them. Um, I I take my hat off to them, to my colleagues, my comrades. They were amazing. I want to again stop and take a breath, though, Pat, and make sure that I'm going down the right trail.
Yeah. No, the thing that really strikes me is the isolation that everybody endured and coming back. I think you're sugarcoating it a little bit in that
Mm.
Vietnam veterans were not welcome. They were spat upon. They were treated horribly. And the isolation that results from that may never have really been totally reconciled, is just astonishing.
I wish I could tell you that I have completely gotten over that, but the truth be known, I haven't. Um, I don't know if other veterans have managed to handle it better than I have. I have a veneer that I keep up, and every once in a while, someone will say something like you just said, and my veneer cracks and my emotions bleed through. It was astonishing. It was almost un-American to welcome troops back. I think the public was confused about what Vietnam was about and why we did it. And there have been many explanations of what that war is about. But the truth is, I think that our engagement in combat there was so distracting to adversaries, to people who thought little of this country, that they did not plot as actively against us as they might have had we been dormant, had we not actually been engaged in some kind of campaign. And hence, I think it tended to push the can of 9/11 down the road a bit. But the men in Vietnam who went to Vietnam to serve, I think they did a service to this country, and that the South Vietnamese people benefited because we, as long as we could, we kept conditions in their country in some kind of manageable state. At some point, though, I guess that it was overwhelming to it, the United States, and we eventually had to depart. I wish we had departed more gracefully, but it was what it was. Um, Back to Dustoff, however, I felt gratified that that men who I know would have died, I'm sure they were terrified when they were wounded or injured or hurt. I'm sure they were terrified about what's going to happen to me next, because they were in the middle of nowhere. And will somebody really come out here in these conditions? And sometimes we had to come out and couldn't land. We had to hover stock still 200 feet in the air because they were under a canopy of trees that did not allow us to land. And so we have to drop a cable down to bring them up. That is innocent enough in peacetime. That's okay. You can do that. But when you're in combat and you're sitting stock still and making a lot of noise and you're all big with the great big red cross as the target, it's dangerous and you can get shot very easily. I mean, someone could throw a rock probably. They had a good arm, but we had to do we call them hoist missions, and they were scary. But we I can say this: I don't know of a single mission that my unit was called in to perform that we did not complete. We didn't. No one came home and said we couldn't find the men, or it was too hot out there, we couldn't do it. Meaning too much fire, too much hostile activity. No, if we went out, we got the men or man and got them to a medical facility that was case hardened and that provided care. Again, I want to take a breath, Pat, because this is Pat Wetzel's show.
No, it's always about my guests. My guests have such great stories, and I always learn so much. You when you came back, I'm presuming it's when you came back from Vietnam, you went on to get a master's in psychology.
I did. The truth be known, I um, I went to undergrad schools, college, as I mentioned, in Baltimore, Morgan State. It was called Morgan State College then, but it's now Morgan State University. And I decided to major in psychology. I realized that I majored in psychology because I wondered why people did what they did. And the person probably that I may have been most impacted by that I didn't, without realizing it, was my own father. He has the same name as me, Arnold Hughbrook Sampson. I was junior, he was senior. And he was a prince among men as far as I was concerned. But on his one day off a week, he was a waiter. He was actually in charge of the waiters. He was called the captain of the waiters. On the one day off per week, he would drink with his buddies to excess. And it hurt me because I wanted my father to be sober and to interact with me and to give me fatherly talks. But that did not happen because of what he chose as his pastime, his letting his hair down. Well, I think I wanted to figure that out about why that kind of thing happened. So I chose psychology, and I did 4 years at Morgan, and then I did go to Howard University. Problem is that in my junior year of college, after never seeing him sick, my father in the last part of in June of 1965, my father came home one night and he was not well. And I just figured that was because he'd been drinking. But we took him to the hospital, me meeting his sister, my aunt, and my cousin and I took him to the hospital. And the next day he was gone. And so I did not know, I didn't even think about parents dying. But he did die, and I was grieving. And I did finish my last year of college, grieving, not knowing it. And I had the benefit of the members of an organization called the Suburban Country Club, bless them, created a fund for my education. So I did go to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and I majored in psychology there and did all the coursework for a master's degree, but I didn't get one because I didn't complete my thesis. I went on active duty with the Army. It was supposed to be a 2-year commitment, but they said they were going to pour $250,000 into my training to become an aviator. And because of that, they added an additional 2 years. So I had a 4-year active duty commitment. When I completed the 4 years, I went back to Howard, finished the thesis, and was awarded the master's degree in psychology.
I want to ask you a question about that. To what
Please.
extent was your psychology degree helpful in helping you understand your own experience coming out of Vietnam?
Vastly helpful. I realized that I had been through something, and the training, the education I'd gotten in the field of psychology made me delve into what that might be and some of the trauma that I might have experienced that I thought was just normal experience, but it was really traumatic. I had a couple people die whose death really impacted me during the tour, but it helped me address the fact that I was to be later diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress disorder. And as many, I speculate, Pat, that many veterans, almost every veteran probably, of every war, probably has some level of PTSD. It goes unrecognized, sometimes undiagnosed, and therefore untreated. But, it's hard to go into a war zone, be at peril, live away from those you love, and adopt to new cultures and not come away changed by the experience, especially when there's hostility involved and people are wounded or dying. So so the psychology probably did help me. And one of the things that did help me also, and this is hope this doesn't sound too perverted, but I mentioned in the earlier part of my comment that 6 officers had gone to flight school. Of that 6, 4 went to Korea, and 2 of us went to Vietnam. And my other friend and colleague, his name was Jerry Tyrus Lee, did not come home in a visible form, and I was allowed to come home. And it made me, frankly, want to figure out why God spared me. And it's made me want to try to reach out and help people. So I ended up, I'm a mediator for the Circuit Court for Baltimore City, in which I'm helping parents figure out how to co-parent their child, even though they themselves may be estranged. I have, helping the medical professionals master their skills. I've tried to do what I can to try to help others because I want to give back and justify the life that God granted me. I didn't have to make it back. And so I want to be quiet, though, to see if you have an additional question for me.
Well, no, PTSD is really an interesting phenomenon, and I think it exists in a lot of parts of society. For example, I think in the cancer community, PTSD is rampant and totally ignored.
Yes.
So I really hear what you're saying. And when I think about it, I think PTSD is partly that experience of being so far out of your comfort zone that you are incredibly isolated. And then in the case of war, you're observing just horrible things.
True.
How
So
do
true.
you have to learn to deal with it? I mean, how? I think we're a little more cognizant as a society now of the need to address this. But how do you release the sort of feelings that you must be carrying inside?
Well, the thing that I did for sure was to actually to share the things the experiences that rattled me, that shook me. One of them involved a little girl who was gravely wounded, a little Vietnamese girl, who I attempted to render first aid to, medical care to, but she died right in my arms, and I talked about that experience. One of the pilots in my unit had an accidental gunshot wound, and I thought that he might die in front of me, and I did a lot of things to try to histrionics, acting, to try to distract him from the fact that he was standing there in front of me, and then I had him sit down, sitting there in front of me with a bullet hole in the middle of his body. That was the result of him, an accidental discharge of his personal sidearm. By the way, the pilots in my unit, the personnel in my unit, we had personal weapons. In our unit, they were revolvers, but we did not have machine guns. We were basically unarmed aircraft. And so that was unusual for Vietnam and for U.S. military aircraft to be unarmed. We flew under the Geneva Conventions, had no weapons, went there to save lives, and to some degree, I had to believe that somebody gave us a break, but it didn't spare me from coming home with 2 Purple Hearts and a Distinguished Flying Cross and a Bronze Star, and I'll stop there. There were more. But the fact is, Dustoff units in general, I thought were valiant. I thought they resulted. Some of the people walking on the earth in this country today are the progeny of the children of Vietnam veterans or their children, and they were alive today because a Dustoff aircraft went out in the middle of nowhere and picked them up and brought them to a medical care that saved them. So we weren't the only saviors. Certainly, the incredible medical staffs contributed to their survival, but we were a major piece of it. We were, first responders, I guess you'd call us. So, so again, I want to not over answer. I want to stop and make sure I'm on track with your thoughts.
Yeah, actually, it brings up something I've thought about a lot. My father died 35 years ago, so I didn't
So
have.
sorry for your loss.
Oh, thanks. I didn't have a chance to talk to him. He flew in World War II,
Mm.
and And the 8th Army Air Force had the highest casualty rate of any of the combat forces in World War
Mm,
II. It was
mm,
deadly to go up in those skies and over Europe.
right,
And yet they did it day after day after day. And
right.
I've often wondered, how do these young men, 19-ish, face that sort of set of circumstances? It just blows me away. And you face something very similar in Vietnam. How do you wake up every day and go and fly these missions? I mean, how do you reconcile what I would assume is the fear, the sense of duty, the sense of helping, the sense of mortality? How does that balance out?
This is going to sound, first off, God bless your father for his service. May he rest in peace. But I'll say this, that we became kings. We became kings of denial. And we denied that the danger would impact us. And we got into those aircraft, or I guess the ground troops put on their boots and went out on a patrol. God bless them. But you had to just say, I hope it won't be me. No, it won't be me. But sometimes, yes, it was you. It was daunting, but it was also something that honored your country. You had to believe that you were there for a reason, and that you had been ordered to do it, and the choice of it was a no-brainer. Not doing it was not an option. You were going to do what you were assigned to do. You had some opportunity along the way to ask out of doing it, but you had not done so, or I had not done so. So I never thought about not getting back in the aircraft. In fact, when I'm on Facebook, I have a photo with me sitting in the aircraft chopper cabin with my helmet on. It's a real photo from Vietnam, and there's a bullet hole behind my head. Most people never see the bullet hole, but it was a fresh bullet hole, and the photo was taken by my medic, who also had a near miss. A bullet almost hit him, and so we got out of that aircraft, went to another one, started it up, and went on up to the next mission. It was daunting, but and you were right about the age. The average Vietnam veteran was 18, 19 years old. The Native American veterans, I think, were even braver. Some of them would be volunteering at age 16 and lying about their age. I guess it wasn't that much fun on the reservation, and they wanted to get into the military, and some of them were dauntless. It was just amazing. In fact, one of my medics his name was Ojeda. I even call his first name Bernard Ojeda. He was an incredible medic. And in my book, I stated that one of the things I said was that I thought he had 13 hands, because he was keeping men alive who should have passed away. But he talked to them. He did pressure bandages, and figured out what they needed, and kept them alert, so that they had not passed into the sleep of the eternal sleep. And we delivered them to a medical facility, still breathing. It was a young man's war. A lot of young men had perished because of it. Officially 58,000 some men, but in actuality, there were probably an additional 2,000 who came home easily, who died from suicide or suicide by cop or something. So, so with that said, it was extreme, and your father's sacrifice and your father's valor is noteworthy, and again, I meant it when I said, even though you said 35 years ago, I meant it when I said I'm sorry for your loss, because we only have two parents, and I'm sure he was a credit to his family and a credit to this country.
How do you think Vietnam guided the course of the rest of your life, and what lessons did you take from your experiences?
And like many, many, many veterans, we never expected for a moment that a war would be the biggest thing to impact our lives, but Vietnam did that. I mean, and to the point where years later, the ravages of the medical experiences that flowed from Vietnam impacted us. Very there's a greatly and rapidly diminishing number of Vietnam veterans still around. I mean, the population is being sapped by medical issues that were tied to our exposure to Agent Orange, were tied to traumatic experiences, and so the PTSD that doesn't PTSD alone won't kill you, but PTSD can create enough confusion where you don't take care of yourself properly. I shouldn't publicize this, but I'll say that I do have glaucoma. I do have diabetes. I do have neuropathy in both my feet. I did have prostate cancer. I think I can call myself a prostate cancer survivor if you really truly survive it. I do have PTSD still. I manage it, but it's not like you can erase it. And so did that impact my life? Absolutely. I'm a 100% disabled veteran, as are any number of my comrades. Our bodies took a toll from the things we were exposed to. So I do recall that part of your question. You took me to such a place that there was one part of your question I feel like I didn't address. So
Well,
if you want to restate it.
What lessons came out of that for you?
That I would love it if we did not have any war. The war is such a waste of human life. I would love it if you go to war. I would love it if they have to have a war that the veterans of such wars are properly honored and recognized for what the sacrifices they make. They leave home, safety, and family, and have to fare for themselves in a place where they did not grow up, and so it made me also kind of distrustful of organizations. I get distrustful of large crowds. Um, I mean, I now know that death is real. And if you haven't experienced death from trauma, that is, you haven't observed it, you haven't been in its midst. It's not something midst. You don't. It's not something that you necessarily will believe can really happen. You are ignorant of the possibilities. Vietnam broadened my scope of my repertoire of responses. I don't like to go around things that explode. Fireworks do not entrance me, enthrall me. So those things come to mind. It says too, that whoever our leaders are going to be, you hope our leaders are not going to be people who will lead our country into conflict with other countries, and that the conflicts that do arise will be resolved with discussion and not hostilities.
If you could rewrite your story, would you?
I would rewrite parts of it, perhaps, yes. If I could, if I could have, I would. I think I'd still certainly have had the military experience. If I could have not have gone to Vietnam, I would not be angry about that. And I've met people who apologized because they didn't pass the medical and they couldn't go into the military. Or I've heard of people going to Canada to avoid military service, and to a person. And in every instance, I have said, good on you for that, because my misery did not need any company. The fact is, it was a brutal war. One of the concerns that I had, in fact, was reading. I've eventually found the Vietnam virtual wall, and it's online. And when I kind of scrolled through it, I ended up finding the name of a fellow who I had competed against in high school track. He went to another high school in the area. Went to Carver High School, and I went to Douglas High School. And he was a sprinter like me. I won that particular race, but I knew he was amongst the Carver sprinters. And I discovered that I saw his name on the wall, on his virtual wall, and I realized that it said he had perished of misadventure and friendly fire. If I had to change anything, I would spare all those young men from going to war. And the only way that I can make some sense of it is to think in my head, it's just part of my own personal theology, that all the Vietnam veterans came home. It's just that some were not visible in visible form. And that I hope that they are watching over their families, and are angels for their families.
Want to hear more of the conversation? Sign up at bumpintheroad.us as a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. You can give it a go for free. Just use the code FREEMONTH. And thank you for listening today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.